Now we are going to look at the payment settings in the admin. So I'm going to refresh, and you see that these are payment settings, or the settings under the payment management in our admin. Let's check what happens when we hit this admin/payments/settings URL. So let's check our web.php file and let's search for payments/settings. Okay, we are here. We have the settings route. This is a get route, and the index action of the settings controller is going to take care of this request. And don't forget that we are inside a route group, the admin route group. So the correct route will be admin/payments/settings, as we can see it here. Let's check now the settings controller and the index action, or method, as you prefer. Okay, so we are in the index method. We are declaring a meta title variable that we're going to pass on to our view inside the compact function or compact helper. In the settings variable, we are going to save all our settings. So basically we are saving the content of the settings table of our database. And then in the currencies variable, we are going to save the content of the currencies table of our database, and we are ordering the currencies by name in an ascending fashion. The view that we are going to present to our user is the settings.blade.php view, and then, as I mentioned with the compact helper, we will pass on these three variables to our view. Let's see now what happens in our settings.blade.php file. Here we go. Alright, so we are just extending the admin app.blade.php file, but what is really important for us is this content section. In this content section, there are two divs, the success session variable div and the failure message session variable divs. Now, these are only important if we fail a validation before we update our settings. So we are going to get back to these two divs or to these two session variables. But now what is important for us is our form here. So we have a form that is going to be a post request to the admin settings update route. So let's check it in the web.php file. It's already open. Okay. So we're going to hit the update method in the settings controller. You can see that this route is defined as a put route, and it's no accident because here in the blade file we are using the @method blade directive, and we are saying that though the form, we post this form, however it's going to be a put request in our routes file. And we also use the CSRF blade directive to post a token with our form for security reasons. When we post our form, as I mentioned, we're going to hit the update action or method inside the settings controller, but let's not go ahead. Let's just stay with the blade file for now. So basically everything that we see here in the payment settings page is inside this form that I mentioned. And for our purposes now, what will be interesting are the payment settings, and inside the payment gateway settings, the Braintree and the PayPal within Braintree settings. The rest we can disregard now because we will talk more about them when we arrive at the Stripe and the PayPal Smart Buttons integration. In our settings.blade.php, the most interesting thing for us is the currency. So we are defining a select tag with the name currency here. This is where the user will select the currency. It's right here. And as you can see, we populated this select tag with the currencies that we have in the currencies table based on the name in an ascending fashion. So the first currency is the AED and the last one is the ZWD. Okay, so what we're doing is that we're basically just looping through our currencies variable, and each currency will be saved into this currency variable now. Now for the value, for each option, we are going to give the name of the currency, which is basically the abbreviation of the currency, like USD here. And to the user, we are also going to show the name or the abbreviation of the currency. If I push F12 here and I select this element, then you see that the value of the option is AED, for example, and the user also sees the text AED. So we are using the old helper of Laravel. And this is because if we fail an update, then the user already selected the currency. So let's say that our user wants to select the euro as the currency, instead of USD, clicks on save, but because of some validation problem and the settings were not updated, we don't want the user to have to reselect the currency. We want euro to be populated by default after a failed validation. So after a failed validation, this old helper will check what the value was in this currency select tag, and EUR is our current value. And if it matches the name of the currency that we are currently iterating through, then it will be marked as selected when we are redirected back to this page. Now, if we don't fail a validation, so if we just hit the URL for the first time and there was no attempt at updating any settings, then the old helper will just check the currency value of this settings variable, and if it matches the name of the currency that we are currently iterating through, then it will be selected. Now I'm going to go back to the page and I will hit refresh. So don't forget that now we just selected euro as a currency, but we didn't try to save it. So if I refresh, then in the currency select, I should see USD here. And yeah, I see USD here because what happens is that the old helper saw that, okay, there was no attempt at updating, so this currency key or this currency select tag is empty. So I will check what currency is in the settings, which is the USD. And when we are iterating through the USD inside of this currencies collection, then it will match the name of the currency, and then it will be selected by default for us. As you can see, the USD is not the first and not the last currency, so during the iteration it is going to be picked up by our old helper and it will be shown to the user as intended. Now the rest of the settings are a bit more simplistic than our currencies. Basically we have yes or no values in all the other settings we have, not just the Braintree but all the other settings. And we are just defining the value of 1 for a yes value, and we are defining a value of 0 for a no value. As you can see, we are using the old helper, but basically when we first refresh the page or when we first hit this URL, then the old helper will just check what the value is in our settings table. And if, for example, we want to use integer price, so if in our settings table the use integer prices value is 1, then it's going to be selected. Otherwise, it has to be 0, and the no will be selected, or the value of 0. However, if we fail an update, then you will see that this old helper will disregard what we have in the settings, but this old helper will check what we tried to submit, and it will be selected automatically for the user. So when we fail validation or we fail an update, then the user doesn't have to reselect all these select tags. User has to take care of only the one for which the validation has failed. And of course we have a lot of select tags here. Use currency symbol, or use comma for separating the decimals, or use the period for separating the decimals. And for our purposes now, what is interesting are the Braintree settings, so if we want to enable Braintree or not, and if we want to enable PayPal within Braintree. The rest of our select tags are not important for us now, but we will get back to these later when we try to integrate Stripe or when we integrate the PayPal smart buttons. We're going to update our payment settings, and then we are going to check the update method in the settings controller, and I will walk you through what is happening when we update the request, and later we are going to look at it in more detail, how we are validating and updating our payment settings. So let's change the currency, for example, to SEK. I want to use integer prices. I want to use the comma for separating decimals, and I want to enable Braintree, and I also want to enable PayPal within Braintree. Okay, I set everything I wanted, and now I'm going to save. And we failed the validation. And it says that the PayPal smart buttons cannot be enabled if PayPal is also enabled within Braintree. This message in the blade file appears because we failed the validation and redirected back with the failure message. This was the exact failure message that we redirected back with. And in the settings blade file, I showed you that we have these divs that will appear optionally after failed or successful update requests. And this is what you see here. So we got the failure message, and because of the failure message, this div, this nice red div appeared, and the user knows what the problem is. I will talk about this later in the course, but basically the problem is now is that I want to enable PayPal within Braintree. However, I also enable the PayPal smart buttons, and this is a no-go. So if you want to use PayPal within Braintree, then you cannot use the PayPal smart buttons, because then there would be a collision and our payments would not work as intended. So I have to disable my PayPal smart buttons, and now I'm going to save the request. But as you can see, everything that I wanted, so everything that I set, is here in the front end. So the SEK currency is selected, not the USD. Integer prices are set to yes, and I set the use comma for separating decimals selected to yes as well. Okay, now let's try to update our settings, and hopefully this time we're going to see a success message here. All right, everything seems to be working fine. Now, because the update was successful, we see the success message, so we redirect it back with a success message here at the bottom that the payment management settings have been successfully updated. And in the settings blade file, this div appears because there is a success message, so there is a nice green background for our success message. Let's check our database. So we want to make sure that everything is working fine. So I go to the Sonic Payments database, to the settings table, and yeah, everything is working fine. So SEK is our currency. We want to use the integer prices, currency symbol, the comma should be the decimal separator, and we enable Braintree, and we are also enabling PayPal within Braintree. As promised, I'm going to give you an overview of what is happening in the update action of the settings controller. All right, so I'm defining a validator variable, and what I'm doing is that I'm using this validator class. This is a basic Laravel class. I included this use statement here, so I can use it in my controller. And I'm calling the make method. I pass all the requests, so every select tag basically that we have here is passed onto this validator object. And now I define here what validations I want to do for each select tag. For the currency, I set it as a required field. It has to be a string, and I also have this validation criteria. So this is the exists validation criterion. Basically, I say that in the currencies table, in the name column, the currency has to exist. So I submitted the currency SEK in our request, and if we check our currencies table in our database here, then we will see that the SEK currency exists. I have to scroll down a bit, and yeah, it's here. So because the selected currency exists in this table, or in the name column of this table, then the validation for the currency field passes. Now for the rest of the fields, the validation is very simple because they are all required and they all have to be a Boolean value, so they all have to be either 0 or 1. Now if for some reason our validation fails, then we are going to redirect back with the errors, and we are passing the validator object. And we will also include the user input, so this is why the user doesn't have to reset all the values after a failed validation. Let's simulate failed validation. What I'm going to do now is tamper a bit with our front end. I'm going to refresh, and as you can see, we don't have USD here because SEK has been selected as the currency. However, now I will tamper with the front end a bit. So I'm pressing F12. I want to come to this SEK field, or the currency select field. And let's say that I want to select USD as the currency. So I want to reset our currency to USD, so to say. However, I'm just going to tamper a bit with the value. So USD1 will be submitted to the update method of the settings controller. And let's see what happens if I try to update now. First I have to select USD, of course. Trying to save. Okay, the selected currency is invalid. So because the value that we received was USD1, then we failed this validation here, the validation for the currency field, because USD1 doesn't exist in the name column of the currencies table. Now actually I forgot to include a failure message here for this validation. This is why you don't see this nice red message in our validation. However, you see that this is what failed, and we have in the settings blade this P tag. Yes, here, this P tag, where we show the validation error of the currency field. And another interesting thing to notice is that now the selected currency is AED. So what happened is that I submitted the value USD1, and because the validation failed here, so because our validation failed, we are redirected back with the input. And the input was USD1. However, there is no USD1 currency when we are loading all the currencies, so the very first currency is basically selected for us after the failed validation. But of course, this can only happen if the user is tampering with our currencies. Now we are going to fail another validation, but it will be a different type of validation. So I want to select USD. And we are going to fail this validation. Unintentionally, I failed this validation before. And after, we validate the fields, we have some other validations, or, we have some other settings that we don't want the user to be able to set. So here, we check if Braintree is enabled. And if Braintree is enabled, and PayPal within Braintree is also enabled, so this field, and the PayPal smart buttons are also enabled, which should be this field here, then we are going to fail the validation again, and we redirect back the user with the input and with the failure message that we already saw earlier. The PayPal smart buttons cannot be enabled if PayPal is also enabled within Braintree. Let's fail this validation again. So now I'm not tampering with the currency field. I'm going to post the USD value here. However, I'm going to enable Braintree, PayPal within Braintree, and also the PayPal smart buttons here. And I expect the validation to fail. And yeah, we indeed failed the validation, and we are showing the failure message. Now let's simulation one other validation fail. Here, so if we are setting PayPal correctly, then we are going to pass this if branch. However, there is one other validation that we have to pass. So if Braintree is not enabled, notice the exclamation mark here. So if Braintree is not enabled, if Stripe is not enabled, and the PayPal Smart buttons are not enabled either, then we are going to fail the validation and redirect back the user again with a failure message that at least one payment gateway must be enabled. So obviously there is no point in disabling all payment gateways, because then it will not be possible to pay. So let's fail this validation. So I disable Braintree, I disable Stripe, and I also disable the PayPal Smart buttons. Let's save. And indeed, the expected result, at least one payment gateway must be enabled. Assuming that we want to update the settings with the correct data, then we will pass also this if branch, so we will pass also this validation. Then we are getting our settings from our database. Now, if we don't find the settings, then we are going to abort with a 403 message, but basically it should never happen. However, we are super safe in our application. And here we are going to update our settings. In the settings variable, we have all our settings content, and then we are calling the fill method on our settings object, so to say, and we pass request all to it. So we pass all this information here. Now this can only work if we are not guarding anything. I will show you the setting model here. Setting.php. And I defined a protected variable guarded, which is just an empty array. Now we have to do this for security reasons, because in our request, all the keys, so currency, use integer prices, and so on, all the keys match up with our database columns. I will show you. So currency, use integer prices, use currency symbol, and so on, and so on. So all our columns in our database are matching the keys that come from the request. And when this is the case, then we can just call the fill method, pass all our request objects into the fill method, and then save our settings object, and everything will be updated. But it can only work if the columns match, all the columns match these values. However, if we don't have this empty array, this empty guarded array, then it should not happen because of security reasons, because you might not want your user to be able to update so many things at the same time. However, here in the payment settings, there is no problem if the user updates everything at the same time in one go. Now, if I put in this guarded array, if I put, for example, currency here, like this, then the user would not be able to update the currency field through the fill method. However, we are not doing such a thing here. But this is something that you have to consider when working with Laravel. So if you want to call the fill method, just make sure that you either have this empty array for the guarded property, or actually you are guarding the field that you don't want to be mass updated. But for our purposes, what is important that we are just mass updating our settings in one go. After our settings are updated, we have some more work to do. So if Braintree is enabled, then we are calling the create Braintree blade file function of this payment gateway blade creation helper. This is a custom made helper that I wrote, so it's not Laravel standard. And we are passing the enable PayPal in Braintree value here. So basically we just have to tell this function if we want to enable PayPal within Braintree or not, and then the Braintree blade file will be created. If PayPal Smart is enabled, then we also have to create some blade files, but we will get back to this when we are dealing with the PayPal Smart buttons integration. Then we see that if there was a successful update attempt, then we are redirecting the user back with a success message that the payment management settings have been successfully updated. Let me just do it one more time. So I will reset our currency to USD, but I will not touch any other. Oh, I have to set Braintree back to enable it. And now I'm going to save. Now we're going to see how this create Braintree blade file method works. So as mentioned, if we are enabling Braintree, then we have to call this method inside the payment gateway blade creation helper, and we have to pass to this method the boolean if we want to enable PayPal within Braintree or if we don't want to enable PayPal within Braintree. So this is our file, this is our class, and this is the create Braintree blade file method. So what happens is that when we use Braintree, we are going to use a blade file in which we will have the necessary JavaScript for Braintree payments. And the name of the file is actually this Braintree.js blade.php. I'm going to show it to you. So it's in our resources views, JS for views, payment gateway JS directory. So this is the actual file that will going to be included in the checkout. But first, we have to create this file based on the settings. And the only setting that we are interested in now is if PayPal is enabled within Braintree or not. First, we define the payment gateway path variable, and we are just defining the string, defining more like where the directory is, where our Braintree.js blade.php file will reside. Now we also have a template file, and this template file is inside this directory. So we are getting the contents of the file. We have the directory here, and we are concatenating templates and Braintree.js template.blade.php. Let's check this file as well. This file is almost the same as the file that I showed you before. So this is the complete file or the finalized file, and this is the template file. The only difference here is that we are having a placeholder. So this PayPal placeholder string, and based on the PayPal settings, we will either just remove this string or we will add the necessary data in order to use PayPal within Braintree. Don't worry if you don't understand what is happening in this file, because later we are going to go through this line by line, but now we are just interested in what is happening with this PayPal placeholder. Let's get back to our payment gateway blade creation helper. Okay, so we are getting the contents of the template file into this variable. And now we are checking if PayPal is enabled or not. PayPal is enabled now in our settings. So then we have this Braintree template variable, and we are replacing this string, this PayPal placeholder, with this PayPal flow vault. And this is what we need to include in our Braintree blade file in order to be able to pay with PayPal. And we are replacing it in the Braintree template variable. So we are replacing it in the same variable. First, we are getting the contents of the template file, and then we are just replacing this string in the contents string. If, however, PayPal is not enabled, we are still replacing the contents of the template string. So we are replacing this PayPal placeholder, but we are replacing it with nothing. And then we will not have the option to pay with PayPal within Braintree. All right, so now we replaced this placeholder with either this string or with nothing. And now we are opening this Braintree blade file. So this is the blade file that is going to be included in the checkout. So we open. We use the base path helper of Laravel. So basically we will arrive into this Laravel payment star directory. Then we pass this variable, so the payment gateway path. So we will arrive at this directory, the payment gateway JS directory. And then we concatenate the file name here. So we are opening this file. And we open it for writing. So we will write or overwrite the contents of this file. And this is exactly what we are doing with the fwrite function. We are just taking this file and overriding its contents with the Braintree template variable. So with the string that contains the appropriate value instead of the placeholder. And to finish up, we are just closing this Braintree blade file, which is ready to be included into our checkouts. So if we look at the file now, then you see that indeed we have this string instead of the PayPal placeholder. However, if I go back to our payment settings, let me just refresh it, and I will say that no, don't enable PayPal within Braintree, and save, then the file is recreated by us. And as you can see, then this string disappeared and we have nothing here, so PayPal will not be instantiated when Braintree will be instantiated. We are going to check the official GitHub repository of Braintree for accepting a payment. This is the official repository. And as I mentioned earlier, we are using the official documentation and official GitHub repositories of the payment processing providers to implement the payment processing in our application. We will not spend much time in this repository now, but after we implement Braintree, we are going to come back to this repository, and then you will see that our implementation matches this implementation. At least the logic of our implementation matches the logic of the implementation in this official GitHub repository. As you can see, we will use the Braintree web drop-in. This is a repository for the Braintree web drop-in. And if you want to check what is happening, then I suggest checking the index.php file and the checkout.php file here. However, later I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you that what is happening here and what is happening here is essentially the same as what is going to happen in our Sonic Payments demo application. Before we move on to the Braintree payments, I'm going to make a last update of the payment settings. So USD is fine. I want to use that currency. I don't want to use integer prices now. I want to use the currency symbol, but I don't want to use the comma for separating the decimals. And I also want to enable PayPal within Braintree. Let's update. And we are ready to check the Braintree payments.